welcome to our newest episode of Construction Hot Takes. I've got a really good friend of mine. He's this guy and I go back to high school in New York.
That's right.
This is Josh Gregory. He is currently the Vice President and General Manager of a industrial contractor with offices here in Atlanta.
That's right.
He's been a general contractor for 25 plus years now.
That's right.
And he started out in the estimating department back when we were roommates in the 90s at local company called Chapman Freeze, as I recall.
Actually, it was 2000 I started there.
It was 2000. And you were going to Southern Poly to get your construction degree back then. And then here we are 25 years later.
That's right.
You're a VP and general manager, and I do this for a living.
That's right.
So I had a really interesting topic for us to talk about today, which is how much or how beneficial has an estimating background been in the success of your career as an operations person, because you moved out of estimating and into project management eventually. And maybe take a couple minutes and kind of tell your story a little bit, and
sure,
and then we'll go from there.
Yeah. So, getting into, I've been in commercial construction since 2000 here in Atlanta, but I really grew up in construction. My whole family's in construction. My dad, uncles, grandfather. I have another uncle. So I grew up on construction sites. So it was kind of a natural progression. But my first real job in the construction industry, like you said, I was still a student, going to school full-time, working full-time, had just gotten married, had a kid on the way. So I was hustling. But I had a job as a project engineer in a pre-construction department, which consisted of calling subcontractors, doing quantity takeoff, leveling bids. Back then, we had to roll up plans and put them in the plan room so subcontractors could come get them and estimate them. That was my job, filling out transmittals. And it's really the ground level of where a construction project starts, quite literally. They call it pre-construction because it's the very first thing. And though that experience, I worked there for several years, then went to another contract here in town, Batson Cook, worked there in pre-construction for several years before transitioning over to operations. And that foundation of pre-construction really built my core understanding of, initially the build it in your head concept, which we all hear, we preach it all the time. You got to build it in your head first. Well, that's where I learned those skills of how to build it in my head, looking at plans, analyzing quotations, and making sure those two things were covered. And if not, what was the pricing? All of that, those were skills I carried with me long into my operational career, and I still use today when I'm reviewing a change order before it goes out to an owner or something like that. So it was foundational for me, my experience in pre-construction, and I still use it today. And we still, as we're training interns today, they're doing a lot of those same activities. Now, we don't roll up plans anymore. We email a PDF, but we're still doing quantity takeoff. We're still doing bid leveling, and you got to build those muscles. And it's an important skill to have.
You talked about build it in your head or build it on paper first. I know when I went to work for a large electrical contractor, I'd been doing industrial work for years, and then they put me on multifamily high-rise. And they started me out. Here I am, a seasoned project manager, well into my career, and they put me in estimating, kind of at my request, because I'd never built anything vertical before. I'd always built horizontal, and I didn't know what I didn't know. And I said, well, let me get a set of plans. Let me start helping out in estimating. Let me do some takeoffs. Let me see how you guys build this thing on paper.
That's right.
I was electrical, as you know, and most of my career I hung busway horizontally and tapped down to feed equipment. And in a high rise, you stand it up on its end. And I'd never done that with busway before. I'm like, how does that work? Like, it's really heavy. So I had to learn physically how to do it, and then I learned how to take it off and how they built it. I had not built a high-rise before, and it was a great way for me to learn how to build a high-rise conceptually before they actually gave me one or two of them to go run. I knew what I was talking about at that point. But that was one trade. So as a general, your background, as I recall, Dad was a mason.
Yep.
But there are a lot of trades when you're a general contractor. How much trade knowledge did you get? Like how is concrete done? How is steel erected? How much of that did you learn through the estimating process versus operations?
A lot of it, right? So because you have to understand how it's built, how the trades are going to proceed. Now, as a general contracting estimating department, we're probably not getting as far into the weeds as you would as the subcontractor. Like, I'm not taking off wire nuts. I don't care how many boxes there are, right? Like, do you have the panels? Do you have the lighting? Do you have so I'm doing it at a slightly higher level. And I know that is a topic of a previous podcast, GC versus subcontract estimating. So there's a difference, but like when you're talking about building the estimate, when you're talking about putting together the schedule, which is often, a requirement on the pre-construction, either via the RFP or you've got to have an idea how long it's going to take to build because you got to make sure you have the general conditions covered for it, our overhead and labor and all of that to cover it. Batson Cook, when I worked there, they self-performed a good bit of stuff. They self-performed a bunch of concrete and some other trades. So we did get a little more granular on those. And so you really do have to learn, when you talk about high rise and concrete, we're going to pour a concrete column, you've got to physically know where that column stops because on the plan it's continuous, but constructing it, it's only going to go up to a certain point and then that's where slab and you've got to understand those breaks. So you learn a lot of that and you learn it through reviewing subquotes, talking to subcontractors, looking at plans, going through bid analysis after the fact. And so understanding how all of the different trades integrate and then what's their approach and then using that in a schedule, that it was, like I said, that's where I really built those muscles of being able to understand a project from the ground up, right? And not just the masonry, which is, one part of the job, right? Understanding all of the trades and sequencing and timing, for instance, if you're talking to a curtain wall contractor, they, depending on how you sequence it, you can go around the building floor by floor. But then the EIFS contractor is going to want an entire elevation, right? They're going to want to go bottom to top or top to bottom, right? So understanding that, making sure you've got coordination and sequencing built into the schedule, built into the pricing, has all of that been considered? All of that you start. And then as the project manager, I didn't have to relearn all that. I already had that foundation from my time in pre-con. So
got it. So you talked about self-perform work. So you did have to get more granular on the self-perform work. At the subcontractor level, when you weren't self-performing, are you doing some sort of, as a general, were you doing some sort of a takeoff to validate the sub's detailed quote? Would you do a distribution takeoff or something like that on electrical to understand to make sure they've got it all covered? Or I guess what I'm trying to get to is, to what depth did you estimate other trades that you weren't self-performing?
So it kind of varied by trade. So for electrical, we would do not necessarily a quantity takeoff, but a survey basically. Okay, we've got this many amps in the service. There are this many distribution panels. We're showing this many lights. Mm-hmm. I don't care how the wire gets between the two. That's your problem as the electrician. But do you have the stuff? We're going to assume you've got it. If you've got the stuff, we're going to assume you've got the stuff to connect it all, right?
In between, okay.
But for instance, steel, structural steel, we would do a rough quantity takeoff to understand how many tons of steel there were, or the breakdown of the joist types that were going in, a takeoff of the metal deck, so that when we were analyzing those quotes, it's not just the price, do they have the right scope and everything, and we could get close, right? Doors, frames, and hardware, we would do it counts, right? How many of this door, how many of that door, how much of this hardware set, and then so that we could level and make sure everybody had what they were supposed to have. But for instance, I'm not, going back to the electrical, I'm not buying boxes, I'm not buying wire nuts, I'm not buying, the commodities, right? But as an estimator at an electrical firm, I'm sure there's formulas for if it's this job, it's this many. I doubt you're counting wire nuts, but
no, it's software and assemblies.
That's right. And you talk about assemblies at Batson Cook, where our software was sophisticated enough that for all that self-perform stuff, we had pretty sophisticated assemblies built into the estimating software. But as somebody new, that actually helped me understand all of the bits and pieces that went into a footing and then a column and then a slab and then, it's post-tensioned. Or if you're doing a tilt wall takeoff, understanding it's not just the form, but then you're going to have some additional formwork for reveals. You're going to have all of the accessories that get cast in, not just the rebar, but all of the accessories required for lifting and understanding all of those. Well, we had assemblies for all of that. So it would help me as a young estimator understand all of the bits and pieces that go into something like that. And then, fast forward to my time as a project manager, like I understood as I'm looking at an accessories quote, like what a lifting eye is and what all these other components are, because I'd spent time doing takeoff and counting those things. And so it was super beneficial.
Got it. Nowadays, I don't hear a lot about people moving from estimating departments into operations. People tend to get into one department and stay there for a long period of time. Is that is that how you've experienced it recently as well, or you hear opposite from that?
I don't. So we start people off in one or the other, operations or pre-con, but they have the option to move. I was actually recruited out of pre-con. I wasn't at the time initially looking to make the jump from pre-construction into operations, but there was a project executive that I had been doing some estimating for, and he needed help. And he said, why don't you come be my APM on the ops side? I was like, what? So I went and did that. It was a whole different world. On the pre-con side, if you don't have something 100% figured out, you can plug some money for it. Like, you can make an educated guess. We're going to put some money in here for it. We think this will cover it. But on the operations side, then you have to figure it out. Like you can't just, I've got money for that. Great. How are we going to spend that money to fix this problem, fix this gap? So that was a big learning here. But so it's funny, my pre-construction director now actually went the other way. He was a project manager, had done some field supervision. He was a superintendent for a while and has now gone back to pre-construction. And as valuable as having pre-con knowledge on the operations side is, having operations knowledge as a pre-construction director is equally as important, right? Because he kind of gets how stuff goes together in the field, right? I love estimates because they're highly organized and everything's neat and clean and everything fits together and the schedule's perfect. Is never how a building gets built, right? So the schedule is this beautiful waterfall, and it's all the pretty colors. It's never how the sequencing actually works, right? The ops side is messy and there's a lot of moving parts, but that pre-con side, it gets distilled down to something very organized. If you're doing it right, in my opinion, it's very organized. And so I think I'd encourage people to work on both sides, because if you want to be in this industry long term, having knowledge of both sides of that equation is critical. Like if you have anything, if you have aspirations to go anything above a project manager, anything above an estimator, like being able to understand those two sides of the coin is critical.
We joke often that if project managers were estimators, you'd never win any work because we put everything in there so we don't run out of money.
But you'd never lose money either.
True, but I never get any revenue either. I never win a project.
That's right. But, there are contractors out there that use that model. They don't have pre-con departments. They're project managers. You keep what you kill, yes. And then you got to go build it. I think there are pros and cons to that model. I'm not a fan personally. That's not what we do at my company. I like having a dedicated pre-con, and it helps us get aggressive when we need to win work without just absolutely killing the project manager, right? But you're right. I mean, if I've got some fantastic project managers, but they're going to make sure it's covered. And I would say the same for superintendents as well. Anytime we have superintendents review general conditions or review a schedule, there's never enough money, never enough time. Yeah, exactly. No. And I get it. I 100% get it, right? I had a funny question just a few weeks ago we were having a conversation over lunch with a project manager, and my pre-con director was there, and the PM asked, guys, it feels like we never have enough money in the general conditions for these projects. Like, we get it. And then, they do a labor projection for the job, like we've taught them. I'm on the job, the super's on the job this many weeks. Like, they're doing an actual projection. And he's like, there never seems to be enough. And I was like, well, yeah, that's probably true. But you got to remember, we're competing in a competitive market right now against other general contractors. And, we're bidding what market general conditions are, because when the owner sits down and levels his 4 GC bids, well, why are your GCs 10% higher than everybody else's? But we also believe there's room to get some buyout in the job to help supplement that, and there's a little give and take. And to your point, if Mr. Project Manager is estimating the job, you're going to make sure all of his GCs are covered, as he should, right?
Yes.
He's trying to mitigate risk. That's his job. So, sometimes you got to win a job before you can make money on it.
Yes. Many times I've said, the estimator won this job, and he gave me an estimate. And he basically said, here's a bucket of money and how I divided it up. Do with it what you will.
Yeah.
Good luck.
And to help with that, I will say, so our model, the model I use, the model I kind of grew up with at my current company, is we have a different approach to that pre-construction to operations handoff. And again, this is where that knowledge of both sides of the coin comes into handy. So rather than, okay, we won the bid, the pre-con guy comes in, drops a binder on your desk and says, good luck, let me know if you have any questions, I'm moving on.
Right.
We actually spend some time so we do a lot of design build, right? So our pre-con guys will stay involved, kind of run the design phase. So it's 30 or 45 days typically for our projects. They're helping get drawings done. They're helping get into permitting. And at the same time, we'll get our operations team assigned, and they're helping build scopes, review scopes, get scopes bought out that we can. And so there's about a 30 to 45 day window in there where both pre-con is still engaged, but ops has come on board, and they're working together to get the project started. And we'll get the design done, we'll get it into permitting. We'll typically get, we call it the big 5 bought. So site, concrete, steel, roofing, and MEP. And we group MEP together because we have to buy it out for design. But by the time the ops manager truly, or the ops team, him and the superintendent, take over the project, it's designed, it's permitted, and it's 70% bought. All right, that's a great place to start a project,
that
essentially,
nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, it's not perfect, doesn't work that way every single time, but in general, that's how we kind of help with, we may be a little light here and here, but as the pre-con director or the pre-con manager that put together that deal, they can help with the transition and I know where the bodies are, but I also know where there's some little buckets of gold, not big buckets, but little buckets, and so we can kind of help that out. I have some strategies that we think we're going to help us buy this out a little harder. And it's not just I threw a binder at him and walked away, good luck. Right. I've worked with a contractor where a PM would get handed a binder, and at the bottom of the budget, there was a big deduct. Just a straight up, we cut this job $250,000 or $500,000, whatever it was, with no okay, we think these 3 subs we can get this, and this sub we can get that. No, it was just a number at the bottom of the line. You have to buy that out as well, and just good luck, right? And then so the PM is that's their starting point. They're in the hole and behind schedule, and so we think our way helps. You live a little longer and a little less stress, but not to say it's easy, but we've all been there.
Yes.
So, and especially if that PM doesn't have the
dumpster fire. We've all been handed one at some point or another.
That's right.
All right. Let's talk about, I have 2 things that are I want to ask you about. One of them is swagging numbers. If you don't have enough data as a general, you're putting a number into the budget. It's a sophisticated wild ass guess, a swag, or scientific wild ass guess. And then there's also bid leveling. I want to ask about a little bit. I've been through both these, but it might be interesting to hear your take on how do you come up with a realistic plug number for something. We won't go as detailed as a mechanical quote, but you've got some unknowns that you need to cover. How does that, do you have historical data that you pull from, or how do those get generated?
That's a great question. We just throw darts at a board. And, no, just kidding.
Sometimes.
So it would be really unusual for something to come up in an RFP or a bid that we're putting together that we've never done before. And so it would also be very unusual for us to not have quotes. But say you get one quote. You don't know if is that a good quote? Is that a bad quote? Are we, without having 2 or 3 to compare. So typically we would rely on historical data. We would look at previous bids. We would look at previous projects that we've won. Okay, is the scope similar? is there a square foot difference? Like, so, 100,000 square foot building, the ventilation, mechanical ventilation versus 1,000,000 square foot, right? The square foot numbers will be slightly different. Like, and we kind of understand that scale just based on historical data. And so we're going to rely on that, like past quotes, past projects, just overall experience. Like, so my pre-con guys are great at, eyeballing, like, well, he's at $289 a square foot, but really we think we can get it for $250 a square foot. So for the estimate, let's put it in at $255, and then we're going to go chase this guy and this guy for an extra quote. So we'll kind of strategize about how we do it. So if it's like an odd piece of equipment or a weird piece of material, we'll probably do some internet research. We might reach out to a vendor or to like a manufacturer or supplier to, hey, if we were going to plug something. And generally vendors and stuff like that are usually willing to help you kind of get a budget in the number. So we will, but all of that just takes a little bit of time and effort up front, right? And so you've got to know that those things are options. Like, we've called mechanical suppliers and be like, hey, we get this weird filtration unit that we don't typically have. Like, what do we need to plug for that or something? Stuff like that. So that's how we would typically handle that.
Got it. And then now roll over to the ops side. You get handed a estimate that's got plug numbers in it. Is that the first thing you go and buy out because it's the biggest unknown?
So we're gonna buy out the job from a sequence perspective, right? So we're gonna look at what do we need right now because we have to mobilize and get started, right? So we're gonna site work, erosion control. We got to get going. Probably get the concrete guy lined up because we got to get anchor bolts going and some rebar going, right? And then we're gonna switch from what do I need to start right now, and then we're gonna transition to where are my long lead times? Like, because I got to get that stuff bought, right? Because if it's going to take 32 weeks to get the gear, that's an optimistic quote, I think.
Right now, that's optimistic. Used to be 10 to 12. Now it's like 40
if I've
to
got
60.
64 weeks to get the gear or whatever, I got to get that bought yesterday, right? So we're going to get on that stuff. If within that electrical quote, there are plug numbers, ideally by that time we have additional quotes, and it's either the pre-con manager or the project manager, whoever's buying out that trade, you got to get on the phone and we got to dig in with those subs and be like, okay, I have a plug, but I need your quote. Like, what are you going to charge me? And so that we can not dial in all those numbers. We will very rarely go to contract with a sub and have a plug number in the contract, unless it's just completely unavoidable, like the thing isn't even designed yet. And that even then, it's probably going to be an allowance that we have tied to an allowance with the customer. So
yeah, I've seen that with like lighting packages, like the owners and the interior designers still haven't finished picking out the fixture package.
That's right.
So we carry an allowance that you've carried as an allowance. And
That's
then we have
right.
to reconcile that all out and finalize it with a change order to true it up at some point.
But just from a risk mitigation perspective, like, we want to lock in the sub as much as we can. We want as little ambiguity or gray or, they could come back and ask for more money. We're going to try to lock all of that in, and not in a rude or unfair way. Like, we just want a clear scope that is very well defined and has dollars for every item in there, right? Like, so
removing uncertainty.
That's it. It's just risk mitigation. So it would have to be an unusual situation for us to go in to contract with a plug number. So that we will have to flush all of those out. And maybe it was just a timing issue at bid time where we just ran out of time and didn't have the quote we needed to make that a hard number. So we plugged something. But between bid time and buyout, we got to flush all those out and make sure that we understand exactly what we're buying and exactly what it costs.
Got it. Switching gears a little bit, I want to get back onto the ops side to kind of tie this all together. What do you think are some of the most important lessons you learned early in your estimating pre-con side that have served you best as an operations person?
Wow, that's a great question. So I think the first one is never assume the sub has it, right? Like, if it's not explicitly called out, ask the question, right? You may not get the answer you want, but at least you got an answer and then you can deal with the solution. Don't assume oftentimes we'll be leveling quotes, and 2 of the subs have the widget. The third sub didn't exclude it, but they didn't include it either, right? It's just gray. Pick up the phone, ask the question. Do you have X widget, right? Yes or no? And if no, okay, can you have it? Like, is that included? You got that? Or do you have to give me an ad on what is it? Because I got to get this thing leveled out, right? Don't assume they've got it. Don't hope they have it. Write the guy a contract, because then 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks later, when your PM gets a change order because, they didn't have it. Well, it's not on my quote, and then you have that whole argument, right? Oh, you didn't exclude it. I didn't include it. So that's the biggest one. Don't assume. And then read exclusions on quotes. Like when you're leveling it out, every sub's got a list of standard and project specific exclusions at the bottom of a page. Read it and believe it.
we say the exclusions are the list of all the ways you've been fucked before.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. And we put them in proposals. So listen, at the end of my specification or clarifications document, section 17 is exclusions. Here's all of the stuff we do not have, Mr. Owner. Subs are the same way. And don't assume, if it's on their list of exclusions, it's there for a reason. That stuff is not, and maybe it's a generic one that doesn't apply to this one, but just go through those. And if there's something on that list of exclusions that the sub is supposed to have, you have to call them and talk it through it. You can't just assume they're going to pick it up. You have to ask them to do that, right? And maybe that's a negotiation tactic when you're getting sub 1 and sub 2, maybe, but that's number 2, is read all of the exclusions. And then number 3, I think, and this is the harder one, but it's something that I learned, is you kind of have to, we get so granular and we're trying to go into every single detail. Sometimes you just have to zoom out a little bit and look at the proposal. And does this make sense? Like, is this, where are they in the group of bids I got? Do we think this guy can do it? Have they done other jobs this, do we know them? Have I ever heard of this guy? Have I worked with them? Kind of zoom out a little bit. And do we need to take a risk with a new person on this job, or do we need to stick with the guy we know that can execute because we're already tight in other places? That's kind of like a 201 or 301 level skill set in the pre-con. But all of that skill set, all 3 of those then apply to project managers who are having to price their own work, right? And, I want to add an extra water fountain. Okay, that's pretty easy, right? Water fountain, accessory guy, give me a number for another water, right? Plumber, I need a number. It's one thing, it's easy. But, hey, I want to add a wing. We're going to expand another 50,000 square feet and we're going to have an office, right? That's a more complex change order, right? And some places that complex a change order would get sent back to pre-con and an estimator would do it. But a lot of places, dude, you're the project manager. You got to figure this out, right? And if you're if you're a project manager who doesn't have estimating experience, then that could be harder for them. Not to say they can't do it. I know plenty of project managers that can, but I think for me, in my perspective, I immediately put on that estimator hat that I wore in 2000 and go to work on breaking that down, understanding the scopes of work. That's another thing we didn't talk about earlier that you learned in that pre-con department, is how to break a building down, how to break a project down into its components, right? Now, I'm old, so are you. I'm still on the 16 division. I don't care. I know they say there's 50 or 75 or 100 divisions. There's 16 divisions now, right? It's all there'll ever be for me. But understanding how those 16 divisions work together, breaking down a set of plans or a change order request, and then being able to analyze the sub bids relative to that. All of that were muscles I built in the pre-con department, but they have served me in breaking down change orders for owners, and then the build it on paper, build it in your head mode. It's critical.
That's great stuff. That's awesome. Well, it's been a lot of fun. I've not had a chance to talk estimating technicals with you in the past before.
I know. I find I can talk about construction ad nauseum. I talk about it.
Podcast about it.
I talked about it so much at home that one of my daughters went into construction. She graduates this fall.
It's fantastic.
With her CM degree.
Wow.
she's doing stuff that I did 25 years ago, and it's a little scary. Makes me feel old.
But proud at the same time a little bit, maybe?
Absolutely.
Sure.
And she's way smarter than I ever was, so she's gonna go way further than I have. But it's
I met her, she was smarter than you.
all of my kids are, but they take after their mom. They're but I love to see the energy and the fire that she has. And we're actually about to hire 2 interns from the school that she's going to come on, and to see that energy and that excitement and knowing what they're about to embark on. And one of them is specifically going to pre-con. Mm-hmm. And the other one is going to be an ops person. And we've already told them, like, yeah, that's where, 75, 80% of your stuff is, but expect some cross-training, some cross-pollination. I think cross-training between departments like that is invaluable. One of my favorite sayings ever is, you've heard it, what happens if we train our people and they leave? Well, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? Right. So we're big on training, right? And I love that, because that's my background, is going from pre-con to ops and having that cross-pollination. Mm-hmm. I think the more people understand more parts of the business, the better off the business is. So
agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. All right. Well, this has been great. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Check us out on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. We'll see you on the next episode.